I disappeared from her life, leaving an empty apartment. But years later I heard a knock at the door and her voice. It was a Thursday. Funny how I remember that. Just an ordinary Thursday with nothing to separate it from 100 others. I left work about an hour early that day. No special reason. The office was dead, my inbox was clear, and I figured I'd beat the rush hour traffic for once. Maybe even surprise Sarah. We hadn't really had a moment alone together in weeks, and part of me thought, this could be nice. Something small to get us back on track. I remember humming as I pulled into the driveway. That's what gets me now, the way I was humming. Carefree, completely unaware of how different things would look just minutes later. When I stepped through the door, the house greeted me with silence. Not peaceful silence. Not the kind where you walk into your home and feel like you can breathe again. No, this was thick, heavy. Like the walls were holding something they didn't want me to know. Like the quiet itself was watching me. At first, I didn't think much of it. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes like I always did. I even called out, "Hey, you home?" No answer. I walked toward the kitchen, thinking maybe she'd stepped out for groceries or was on a call upstairs. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped cold. There they were. 2 wine glasses in the sink. That's not unusual, I told myself. People drink wine. But these glasses weren't just rinsed and left there casually. One of them had a smudge of lipstick, dark, like a plum red. Not the kind Sarah wore. She was more of a nude tones and lip balm type. I used to tease her about it when we were younger, how she always insisted red was too loud. She hated drawing attention. The other glass had fingerprints, clear as day, near the bowl and up the stem. Like someone had gripped it tightly, nervously maybe. And then I saw a crumpled napkin next to the sink. Berg *NDY stained, torn slightly at the edge. Like someone had balled it up mid-sentence. Still, I tried to justify it. Maybe she had a friend over? Maybe her sister? But when I walked into the dining area, every thread of denial began to unravel. A man's jacket. It was slung over the back of the chair like someone had just stepped away for a second. Charcoal gray. Well, something expensive, judging by the stitching and the subtle designer tag near the collar. It didn't belong to me, and I knew that the instant I saw it. That's when something shifted in me. Not rage, not even panic, just a drop, like my stomach hit the floor. I took a step back, then forward again, staring at the jacket as if it might disappear if I blinked. Didn't. It just sat there, bold as anything, taunting me with its silence. The door to the backyard creaked open. I turned just as Sarah walked in, phone in hand, mid-sentence. She saw me and paused. "Oh," she said, blinking. "You're home early." She didn't look guilty. That's the part that messed with me the most. She didn't look caught or flustered. No deer-in-headlights moment. Just a calm, casual expression, as if nothing was out of place. I gestured to the wine glasses, the jacket. "You have company?" She hesitated, then gave a small smile and nodded. "Yeah, Ryan was here. We were working on the Miller account." Ryan. I knew the name. She'd mentioned him maybe once or twice, always in the context of her office. Project manager, recently promoted. "Bit of a know-it-all," she'd said once, laughing. I stared at her. "So you guys drink wine during strategy meetings now?" She chuckled softly, but I noticed how her eyes flicked to the sink before coming back to me. "It's after hours," she said. "I mean, kind of." He brought a bottle over, said it'd help the creative process. "Ha!" She started moving toward the sink, scooping up the napkin and tossing it in the trash like it didn't matter. "I told you we were working late this week. I mentioned the client's revised deadline." Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't. But even if she had, that didn't explain the jacket. Or the wine. Or why she'd look me straight in the eye and offer a script instead of an explanation. I picked up the jacket gently, holding it between 2 fingers. "Ryan, forget this?" She gave a small shrug. "I guess so. He left in a rush. His Uber showed up early." No apology. No concern. Just brushing it off. I set the jacket back down. "You didn't think to mention someone was over?" Her voice stayed even. I didn't think it mattered. Didn't matter. Those two words kept echoing in my head. Didn't matter. The lipstick on the glass. The jacket. The fact that she never once texted or called to say, "Hey, I've got a male coworker over while you're out. Just so you know." I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and walked past her. Went upstairs. Shut the bedroom door. Sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat. I stared at the floor for a long time. And here's the thing, I wanted to believe her. God, I did. I wanted to believe that it really was just a work meeting. That the wine was innocent. That the lipstick somehow came from a mislabeled glass in the back of our cabinet. That everything I saw meant nothing. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the jacket. Or the lipstick. It was the way she told the story. Too smooth. Too easy. As if she'd practiced. And that's when I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for months. This wasn't the first red flag. Not even close. This was just the first time I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid there, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles, my mind replaying the evening like a scene from a bad movie. Sarah had gone to bed without asking if I was okay. She didn't come upstairs to talk. Didn't check on me. Just stayed downstairs watching TV like nothing had happened. That silence between us? It said more than any fight could. Eventually, I slipped out of bed and sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the faint glow of the streetlight creep through the blinds. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was just tired or stressed or reading into things that didn't deserve this much space in my head. But I couldn't shake it. And honestly, this wasn't just about that night. That was just the first blow. The thing that knocked the wind out of me enough to admit what I'd already known for a while. Sarah had changed. Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. It started months ago. I remember the first time it really hit me, actually. It was a Saturday morning back in early spring. We were supposed to go visit her parents. I came downstairs expecting to find her in the kitchen, maybe making coffee like usual. Instead, she was already dressed, hair done, makeup on, looking like she was headed to a photo shoot instead of a family brunch. "You look amazing," I said genuinely. She barely glanced up. I figured I'd take a detour, stop by the market, thought I'd pick up some wine. That was the first detour. There were more after that. Little excuses that added up over time. More solo errands, longer days at work, last-minute changes to our plans. She started meeting friends after work a lot more, but never wanted me to join. Said it was just the girls catching up and that I wouldn't enjoy it anyway. Maybe she was right, but it didn't feel right. The worst part? She stopped sleeping close to me. We used to fall asleep tangled together, her head on my shoulder, legs tangled under the blanket. At some point, I couldn't even pinpoint exactly when, she started pulling away, curling up on her side of the bed, back turned, arms folded. When I'd reach for her in the dark, she'd either pretend to be asleep or gently brush me off with a muttered, "I'm just tired tonight," night after night. I tried not to take it personally. Everyone goes through ruts, right? But it wasn't just the physical distance, it was emotional, too. Conversations became transactional. "What's for dinner? Did you pay the cable bill? Don't forget the plumber's coming Wednesday." Nothing real. No warmth. No laughter. And then there were her weekends at her sister's place. That used to happen maybe once every couple of months. Family stuff. Nothing weird. But now, every other weekend, like clockwork. She'd pack a bag Friday evening and be gone until late Sunday. She'd text once, maybe twice while she was away, always brief, always vague. Then she'd come home looking worn out. Not refreshed. Not like someone who just spent a relaxing weekend with family. I asked once, just casually, what they'd done that weekend. She said something about helping her sister paint the living room. But when I joked that she didn't have a single paint stain on her, she rolled her eyes and changed the subject. Another time, she claimed they went wine tasting. But her phone's camera roll, which I glanced at when she handed me her phone to check directions, had nothing. No photos from that day at all. And speaking of her phone, she used to be careless with it. Left it on the counter, face up, unlocked. I could ask her to check something, and she'd hand it over without hesitation. Now, locked always, face down, glued to her hand like a lifeline. She even took it into the bathroom every time. At first, I tried not to care. Everyone values privacy. But when someone goes out of their way to hide, that's not privacy. That's something else. One night, she got a message while we were on the couch. I heard the buzz, glanced over, and saw the screen light up. But before I could read anything, she snatched the phone up and said she had to make a call real quick. She disappeared upstairs and didn't come back down for nearly half an hour. When she did, her face was red, like she'd been crying. I asked if everything was okay. She gave me this sad, little half-smile and said, "Just work stress." It didn't feel like work. Another time, I noticed something strange about the laundry. I was tossing her clothes in the wash when I picked up one of her cardigans, and it reeked of cologne. Not mine. A sharp, musky scent that didn't match anything I owned. I stood there, holding the sleeve to my nose, trying to convince myself it could have come from a department store, or a taxi, or literally anything else. But that wasn't the first time I smelled it. The same scent had lingered on her coat the week before. I remembered it because it stayed on my hoodie after I hugged her. I never asked her about it. I wish I had, but I knew the answer I'd get. Some breezy explanation that made me feel like I was paranoid. Like I was the one imagining things. And maybe I was. Maybe I wanted to be. But the more I paid attention, the more the signs piled up. Even her smile changed. It's hard to explain that to someone who's never loved a person deeply, really known them. But when you do, you start to recognize everything. The way they breathe, the way their voice lilts when they're happy, the way they smile when they're genuinely glad to see you. Sarah used to smile with her whole face. Eyes crinkled, nose scrunching just a bit. That little sideways smirk she didn't know she did. Lately, her smile had been something else. Tight-lipped, glazed over, like she was forcing it out of obligation. That kind of thing doesn't just happen overnight. I tried to brush it off for weeks, told myself it was stress, or burnout, or that maybe I'd been distant too. But the truth was, I didn't recognize the woman lying next to me anymore. I couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed with me, or kissed me just because, or looked me in the eye for longer than a second without looking away like she was afraid of what I'd see. And maybe she was. Maybe she knew I was seeing something. Because the weirdest part? I wasn't even looking for it at first. I wasn't going through her phone or tracking her location. I wasn't stalking her social media. I wasn't trying to catch her doing anything. But still I saw it. The slow unraveling. The change in habits. The tiny, unspoken ways people start to pull away when they think they've already left in their mind. I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I didn't have proof, and part of me still wanted to believe we could fix it. That this was just a rough patch. That she was overwhelmed and I'd been too wrapped up in work or life or whatever to see it earlier. But the wine glasses, the jacket, that damn napkin, they brought everything into focus. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't in my head. This was the slow death of something I didn't even realize was already bleeding out. And now I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I couldn't unfeel the hollow space where trust used to live. I couldn't keep pretending that things were fine, that Sarah was fine, that we were fine. Because we weren't. And I had no idea what was coming next. A week later, it all came crashing down. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because Sarah had left early, claiming she had an off-site meeting with a potential client on the north side of town. She left in a hurry, skipping breakfast, dressed a little sharper than usual. Black skirt, heels, hair straightened just right. She looked good. Too good for a business pitch, if I'm being honest. I watched her go without saying much. The front door clicked shut, and that was that. No kiss. No love you. Just silence. I had the rest of the day off. I'd taken some personal time. Told my manager I needed a break to handle things at home. Truthfully, I didn't have a plan. I just couldn't concentrate at work anymore. Not with all the questions rattling around in my head like loose change. Something had been gnawing at me for days. The jacket in the dining room. The lipstick on the glass. The cologne. Her new habit of locking the bedroom door when she changed. even though she'd never done that before. And then there was the bracelet I'd found tucked between the bed frame and the wall the day before. Silver, delicate, not hers. Or at least not anything I'd ever seen her wear. When I showed it to her, she laughed. Laughed. Said it must have slipped off her wrist while she was cleaning, even though she hadn't worn jewelry that day. I didn't argue. I just nodded, pocketed the bracelet, and walked away. That morning, something in me snapped. I don't know what it was. I wasn't angry, just focused, clear, like my gut had stopped whispering and started shouting. Around 11 a.m., I grabbed my coat and keys. I told myself I was just going to run errands, grab some lunch, maybe take a walk to clear my head, but I wasn't being honest. Not with myself, not with anyone. Halfway down the street, I doubled back. Our apartment building had a side entrance, a narrow stairwell that led up to the second floor. I used it sometimes when I forgot my keys or when the front buzzer wasn't working. I knew Sarah rarely locked that door, said it was too much of a hassle. Normally, I would have texted her. Normally, I would have knocked. But this time, I didn't want her to know I was coming. I wanted to see what the silence would reveal without her there to fill it with words. I pushed the door open slowly. It creaked on the hinges like it always did, but nothing stirred inside. No sound, no TV, no music, no voices. The air inside felt still, like it had been holding its breath. I stepped in and closed the door behind me, careful not to let it slam. My shoes felt too loud against the hardwood, every step echoing down the hallway like a warning. When I got to the living room, everything looked normal. Couch pillows in place, a folded throw blanket on the armrest, coffee mug on the table, her laptop open but asleep. It looked like a regular day in the life of someone who lived here honestly. But it wasn't. It was too quiet. Then I noticed something. One of the bedroom doors was slightly ajar. Not ours, the guest room. We rarely used it except for the occasional visitor. I hadn't even been in there in weeks. I moved closer. The door let out a faint creak as I pushed it open. And that's when I saw them. Shoes. Pair of men's dress shoes. Black leather. Sitting neatly by the edge of the bed. Not mine. I froze. My eyes drifted up, slowly, cautiously, like I was afraid of what I'd find next. There, on the bed, half covered by the sheets, lay Sarah. And next to her, shirtless, eyes closed, one arm lazily thrown across her waist. Ryan. I didn't need a second look. I recognized him from a company holiday party 2 years ago. He'd introduced himself as one of Sarah's work buddies. We'd made awkward small talk over drinks, and he'd shaken my hand a little too firmly. Now he was lying in our guest bed like he belonged there. I stood in the doorway, stunned. Not angry, not emotional, just numb. Sarah stirred first. Her eyes blinked open. When she saw me, her whole body tensed. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She didn't scream, didn't flinch, didn't try to hide. She just stared. And that stare? It wrecked me, because it wasn't surprise. It was recognition, like she knew this moment was always coming. Ryan sat up groggily, rubbing his eyes. He looked confused at first, probably thought I was a roommate or maintenance or something. Then he followed Sarah's gaze to me. "Oh," he muttered, scrambling for his shirt. John, right?" I didn't respond. My mouth was dry, my chest tight, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at Sarah, waiting for her to speak. She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, though it didn't matter. Modesty had left the room hours ago. "John," she started, her voice low. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, voice colder than I thought possible. "Because this seems pretty self-explanatory." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't move, didn't deny, didn't cry, just guilt. Quiet, still guilt. Ryan was already halfway into his shirt, mumbling something about giving us space. He grabbed his shoes, those same polished ones I'd seen by the bed, and brushed past me without meeting my eyes. And then it was just us, Sarah and me. The silence felt like a wall between us. I stood there for a long time before I finally spoke. I came home to pick up a jacket, I said. That's all. Didn't expect a show. John, please. Don't, I said. Don't beg. Don't lie. Not now. She wiped at her face, but the tears didn't come. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I let out a bitter laugh. You mean you didn't want me to find out at all? She didn't answer. I looked around the room, at the sheets, the open window letting in a breeze, the half-drunk bottle of wine on the nightstand. The same kind from last week. All the pieces clicked. All the little signs. The lipstick. The cologne. The bracelet. The locked phone. The tired excuses. The detachment. It wasn't stress. It wasn't distance. It was him. It had always been him. I didn't yell. Didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know how long it had been going on. Didn't want to hear her say it didn't mean anything. Or that it was a mistake. Or whatever else people say when they get caught. I just walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer by the sink, took out my keys, took off my ring, laid them both next to the coffee maker, and left. I didn't pack much, just enough to not look like I was running. A few shirts, pair of jeans, my toothbrush, a notebook that still had Sarah's name scribbled inside the cover from some long-forgotten list we'd made together. I didn't bring my wedding ring. That was still in the kitchen drawer, beside the keys. I'd left them both behind on purpose. Like a marker. A quiet way of saying, I'm done here. I thought I'd feel anger. Rage even. Some kind of cinematic explosion. But it never came. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't breaking things or pacing around. I was just empty. Like someone had cut out the part of me that felt things and filled it with silence. The apartment felt too clean as I moved through it one last time. The framed pictures on the wall mocked me with smiles that didn't mean anything anymore. There was one of us on a beach, arms wrapped around each other, squinting into the sun. I didn't take it down. I just stared at it for a while. I tried to remember how I felt in that moment, but the memory was faded now, like an old Polaroid left in the sun too long. I checked the time. Almost midnight. She was still in the bedroom. I could hear her moving, slow, soft footsteps, drawers being opened and closed, maybe looking for me, maybe not. She hadn't come out since Ryan left. I wondered if she'd even noticed I was still here, or if she even cared. I could have confronted her again, sat her down and asked her all the questions a man's supposed to ask when he finds out his life's been ripped out from under him. Why him? How long? Was it ever real? But the truth is, I didn't want the answers. What could she possibly say that would make it better? Nothing. I left the apartment without a word. No note. No door slam. Just the quiet click of the lock behind me. The night air hit me like a slap. Cool. Sharp. Grounding. It smelled like wet concrete and cigarette smoke. And for some reason, that comforted me. Something about the world outside continuing like normal. Like my personal catastrophe was just another forgettable Tuesday night in the city. I walked. No destination, no direction. Just me and the sound of my footsteps. I wandered past the diner we used to order from on rainy nights. Past the bookstore where we once argued about buying too many cookbooks we'd never open. Past the park where she first told me she loved me. Every corner felt haunted. At some point, I ended up at the bus station. It wasn't planned. My feet just brought me there. Maybe I was hoping to feel lost enough to find something again. Maybe I just wanted to disappear somewhere she couldn't reach me. Not physically, not emotionally. I walked up to the ticket window. The woman behind the glass looked up from her magazine. Where you headed? I opened my mouth to answer, and realized I had no idea. Doesn't matter, I said. Just whatever leaves next. She raised an eyebrow like she'd heard it before. Probably had. Probably dozens of guys like me passed through every month. Eyes hollow, suitcase half-zipped, hearts in pieces. She tapped on her keyboard, printed a ticket, and slid it under the glass. Cleveland, she said. Bus leaves in 20. Cleveland. I nodded. Didn't question it. Didn't care. It was far enough. I found a seat in the back of the bus. Only a few others were on board. An old man in a raincoat sleeping with his mouth open. A woman scrolling through her phone with her headphones in, and a kid playing some noisy game on a cracked tablet. No one paid me any attention. Perfect. The engine groaned to life. We pulled away from the curb, and just like that, I was gone. Not just from Chicago. From her. From everything. The ride was long. I didn't sleep. I stared out the window as the city lights blurred into highways and rest stops and fields that stretched endlessly under the dark. I watched the world keep moving, even though mine had stopped. Somewhere around 4 a.m. the sun started rising in thin streaks of gold and pink. I remember thinking how wrong it looked, how the day had no business being beautiful. When we got to Cleveland, I stepped off the bus with no plan, no hotel, no real idea of what I was doing. I just walked. Again. Eventually, I found a cheap room above a bar. The kind of place where the walls were thin, the carpet smelled like beer, and the receptionist didn't ask too many questions. I paid cash for a week. The room had one window, a creaky bed, and a desk with a flickering lamp. It felt like a place someone else would stay, a temporary shadow of a life, which I guess is what I was now. The first night, I didn't unpack. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, letting the quiet ring in my ears. At some point, I realized I'd been holding my phone in my hand for over an hour. I hadn't checked it since I left. No texts, no missed calls, no apologies. Not that I expected any. Still, I turned it off. Let the battery die. I didn't want her voice finding me. The days that followed were strange. Not good. Not bad. Just weightless. I wandered the city, tried to blend in, watched people live their lives like nothing had changed. I ate cheap sandwiches at corner delis, drank gas station coffee, stared at people who still had somewhere to be. Sometimes I wondered what Sarah was doing. If she'd gone back to work. If Ryan was still around. If she'd cried. If she'd even noticed I was gone. Other times, I didn't think of her at all. And those moments, fleeting as they were, felt like relief. Eventually, I got a job. Warehouse gig. Nights mostly. Lifting boxes, sorting deliveries, sweeping floors. It was mindless, physical, exhausting. And that's what I needed. Something to fill the time. Something to quiet the noise. I made just enough to extend the room another week. Then another. Then I stopped counting. One night, maybe a month in, I passed a mirror in the hallway and didn't recognize myself. Beard coming in patchy, eyes sunken, clothes wrinkled and worn. I looked like someone who'd been running and forgotten what it felt like to stop. I didn't know who I was without her, but I also didn't know who I was with her anymore. There's a kind of grief that comes when someone dies. But there's another kind, the one that comes when someone's still alive, but the version of them you loved is gone. That's the kind that lingers, that doesn't give you a funeral to cry through or a eulogy to write. Just silence. And I lived in that silence. Day after day. Night after night. There were moments I almost reached out. On my birthday. On hers. On what would have been our anniversary. I thought about writing a letter, leaving a voicemail, even sending a picture of the lake I visited sometimes when I needed air. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I missed her. Or just the version of me that existed when she still loved me. 7 years can pass without you even noticing, if you're determined enough to disappear. At first, it wasn't a plan. I told myself Cleveland was temporary. Just a place to catch my breath, to figure out what came next. I'd get a job, save some money, maybe move somewhere warm, maybe go back to school. That was the script I rehearsed in my head while stacking boxes at the warehouse, night after night. But 1 week bled into the next. One shift became another. The city's gray streets started feeling familiar, then routine, then invisible. People came and went from the building above the bar where I lived. Bartenders rotated. Regulars changed. But I stayed. Always the guy with the quiet nod, the crumpled bills for rent, the door that never opened to visitors. Cleveland blurred into Pittsburgh almost by accident. One day the warehouse cut hours. I followed a coworker's lead and applied at a distribution center 2 states over. They offered night shifts and no questions. I packed what little I had, a duffel bag and a box of notebooks filled with half-started thoughts, and boarded another bus. No goodbye, no forwarding address. Pittsburgh was the same story with different scenery. New streets, new faces, same shadows. I rented a tiny room above a garage this time. The landlord never asked about my past, and I never offered. My life became a string of quiet routines. Lift, sort, clock out, walk home, sleep, repeat. I didn't talk about Sarah. Not once. Not to coworkers, not to the bartender down the street, not even to the guy at the laundromat who liked to chat while our clothes spun. I became a man who lived between the hum of machines and the hiss of his own breath. A man who'd decided it was easier to be invisible than risk being known again. Some mornings, I'd wake up before my alarm and lie still, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Her face would drift back to me, not as it was in that guest room, but earlier. The beach photo. The way she'd laugh so hard at bad movies. The way she used to squeeze my hand under the table when we were at dinners with her family. Our secret little signal of I'm here. For a few seconds, I'd almost feel like I was back there. Like the last 7 years had been a bad dream. Then the radiator would rattle or a truck would downshift outside, and I'd remember where I was. Who I was. I built walls inside myself without meaning to. Conversations stayed shallow. If someone asked where I was from, I'd shrug and say, here and there. If they asked about family, I'd change the subject. Friends drifted away before they could even form. Relationships weren't even on the table. Sometimes at night, on my walk home, I'd see couples outside bars, laughing, leaning into each other, sharing a cigarette, and something would flicker in me. Not envy exactly, more like recognition. Like looking at an old photograph of yourself and realizing you no longer know that person. I never followed Sarah online. Never searched her name. Never tried to find Ryan. I told myself it was strength, moving on. But really it was fear. Fear of confirming she'd built a new life while I was still drifting. Fear of seeing her happy. Fear of seeing her hurt. Fear of seeing anything at all. The notebooks piled up in my room. Page after page of false starts. Letters to no one. Fragments of memories. Plans I never followed through on. Whole months went by where the only words I wrote were grocery lists. I aged in the mirror without noticing. Gray at the temples. Lines around the eyes. My hands rough from work. The kind of face you pass on the street and forget immediately. One winter I got sick. Nothing serious. Just a fever that kept me home for a few days. I remember lying there under a thin blanket, staring at the wall, realizing I didn't have a single person to call. Not one. The silence pressed in so heavy I thought it might crush me. And yet I kept going. Night after night. Shift after shift. There's a strange comfort in erasure. When no one knows your story, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify who you were or why you left. You just exist. But the cost is high. You lose your reflection. I started noticing it in small ways. How I'd forget dates. How I'd pass mirrors without looking. How I'd catch myself thinking of Sarah less and less. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because she'd become abstract. Like a character from a story I'd once read. Vivid at first but fading with each page. Still, some mornings I'd wake up with her name in my mouth. Like a word I'd been about to speak in a dream. I wondered sometimes what she told people about me. Did she say I died? Did she say I ran off with someone else? Did she even mention me at all? I pictured her life in fragments I'd never see. New job, new apartment, maybe kids. Maybe not. Maybe Ryan lasted. Maybe he didn't. Maybe she kept my ring, or maybe she threw it away the minute I walked out. I never knew. I told myself I didn't want to. 7 years. That's how long it took for the silence to start cracking. It happened on an ordinary evening. I was walking back from the warehouse, boots scuffing against the salt-streaked sidewalk. Snow had started to fall, thin and sharp, stinging my face. I ducked into a convenience store to buy a coffee, and the clerk, a kid barely 20, asked if I was heading home to my family for the holidays. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't have one. Not anymore. Not in any way that counted. That night, back in my room, I sat at the desk and opened a fresh notebook. For the first time in years, I wrote her name. Just her name. over and over until the page filled. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. The letters blurred. My pen shook. And before I knew it, I was crying quiet, angry tears that had been waiting 7 years to fall. I didn't know what I was crying for. Her, me, the life we lost, the man I used to be, all of it, none of it. When the tears stopped, I sat there staring at the page. The name looked strange now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, sat in the dark for a long time. That was the night I realized the erasure hadn't worked. No matter how far I'd gone, no matter how many boxes I'd lifted, no matter how many addresses I'd cycled through, the past was still inside me. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. And soon, though I didn't know it yet, it was coming back. One rainy evening, I heard a knock. I opened the door, and there she was. Sarah. Older, thinner, soaked from the storm. She said nothing at first, just handed me a weathered envelope. Inside was a letter she claimed to have written the night I vanished. In it, she begged for forgiveness and called everything a mistake. But her eyes, they didn't ask for reconciliation. They warned me of something else. The letter revealed something darker. Years ago, someone had slipped a photo under our door of a shadowy figure holding a bracelet. The same bracelet I thought was from her affair. Sarah admitted she burned the photo, afraid. She swore it wasn't Ryan's. She said someone else had been in our home, planting doubt. Recently, she got another photo. Same angle, same figure. We thought it ended with betrayal. But maybe it only began there.